Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We're here in docket number 2021-3E. Before we take roll, let's take a brief moment of silence. Thank you. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioner Thomas, Commissioner Williams, Commissioner Powers, Vice Chair Belzer, and Chairman Williams. Joining us virtually, we have Commissioner Urban and Commissioner Caston. Attorney Stark, would you please prepare the docket?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, other commissioners, we're here for the proceeding in docket number 2021-3-E. This is the proceeding in the annual review of base rates for fuel costs of Duke Energy Carolinas, LLC, and constitutes potential increase or decrease in fuel cost adjustment and gas adjustment. Mr. Chairman, this hearing's been scheduled to be conducted virtually on September 13th, and I believe also the 14th has been reserved if needed. Mr. Chairman, I believe the docket is in order.
Thank you, Attorney Stark. I'm going to take appearances from the parties. Duke Energy Carolinas.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. I'm Katie Brown here for Duke Energy Carolinas. I'm in-house counsel. Also here with me virtually this morning is Sam Wellborn from the law firm of Robinson Gray.
Good morning, Attorney Brown and Attorney Wilburn. Thank you for being here with us today. Next, we will go to South Carolina Energy Users Committee.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Scott Elliott. I'm present on behalf of the energy users this morning.
Thank you for joining us, Attorney Elliott. South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. This is Kate Mixon on behalf of the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy and South Carolina Coastal Conservation League. And with me here today is Attorney Ann McClancy.
Good morning, Attorney Mixon. Good morning, Attorney Clancy. South Carolina Department of Consumer Affairs. Office of Regulatory Staff.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. This is Chris Huber here for the Office of Regulatory Staff, and I'm joined by Andrew Bateman.
Good morning, Attorney Huber. Good morning, Attorney Bateman. Attorney Huber, if you would please increase your volume, sir. We're having some trouble hearing you in the hearing room.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Is that better?
Yes, sir, it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Are we ready to proceed?
Mr. Chairman, this is Katie Brown on behalf of Duke Energy Carolinas. We had just a couple of preliminary matters to address this morning before we get started.
All right. Please address those matters now.
Of course, Mr. Chairman. First is with respect to DEC witness Suez's rebuttal testimony. It contains certain confidential information relating to unit incremental costs that is proprietary and commercially sensitive to the company. We would request that the confidential version of witness Suez's rebuttal testimony be accepted by the commission under seal and maintained as confidential.
No problem. We will be able to accommodate that request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The second and last issue this morning, Mr. Chairman, is the order in which the company plans to present its witnesses. Due to the complex and technical nature of the issues raised in the intervener's direct testimony, the company has proposed via a letter filed in this docket to present its rebuttal witness, John Suez, after the presentation of direct testimony by the other parties. We believe that in this case, it would be a little bit confusing for Mr. Suez's rebuttal testimony to be presented before the presentation of Ms. Debbie Glick's direct testimony, and we would request that witness Suez's testimony be presented during the rebuttal phase following the presentation of direct testimony to which he is responding.
Okay, is there any objection? All right, hearing none. And just to go over that again, Attorney Brown, you want the witness to testify in which order?
We'd just like Mr. Suez to testify after Ms. Debbie Glick. After intervener testimony, direct testimony is presented.
Okay. So before the Office of Regulatory Staff presents their case, essentially, that's what you're saying.
We would ask that, yes, that he go after Ms. Debbie Click.
All right. That's fine. Granted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Is that all?
That's it. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The company would first call Mr. Kenneth Church to the stand.
All right, Mr. Church, if you would take the witness stand and pause to be sworn in by our court reporter.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Church, if you would raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you very much.
You.
Good morning, Mr. Church. Would you please state your name for the record?
Yes, my name is Kenneth D. Church.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I am employed by Duke Energy Corporation and serve as the General Manager, Nuclear Fuels Engineering for both DEP and DEC.
How long have you worked in the nuclear engineering field?
I have over 30 years of experience in the nuclear engineering field.
What is your educational background?
I have a degree in mechanical engineering and am a registered professional engineer.
Are you involved in any organizations that are relevant to your testimony?
Yes, I have served as chairman of the Nuclear Energy Institute's Utility Fuel Committee and on the World Nuclear Fuel Markets Board of Governors.
Please describe any prior roles you have held that are relevant to your testimony in this proceeding.
In previous roles, I have worked on fuel rod mechanical licensing analysis, fuel rod and fuel assembly mechanical design, fuel assembly and control component design, fuel performance, fuel reload engineering, fuel procurement, contract management, fuel regulatory interface, on-site fuel inspection, spent nuclear fuel management, and fuel reload licensing analysis functions.
Please describe your current responsibilities at the company.
As General Manager of Nuclear Fuels Engineering for DEC and DEP, I am responsible for nuclear fuel procurement and spent fuel management, fuel mechanical performance, reactor core design, probabilistic risk assessment, and safety analysis for 6 nuclear plants.
Thank you, Mr. Church. Mr. Chairman, at this time, based upon Mr. Church's education and extensive experience in matters related to nuclear fuel and nuclear fuel procurement, I propose to tender this witness as an expert in the field of nuclear fuel procurement.
All right. Any party want to cross-examine the witness on his credentials to be qualified as an expert? All right. Your request is granted, Attorney Brown. Mr. Church is qualified as an expert in state that area again, please.
Nuclear fuel procurement, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Church is qualified as an expert in nuclear fuel procurement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Church, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 9 pages of direct testimony that were pre-filed with the commission in this proceeding?
Yes, I did.
If I asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed direct testimony this morning, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that Mr. Church's pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Church's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Church, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 2 exhibits that were attached to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes to those exhibits at this time?
No, I do not.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that Mr. Church's 2 pre-filed exhibits be entered into the record as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Church's 2 pre-filed exhibits will be entered into the record as they will be marked as a composite exhibit. Church Exhibit 1 and 2 will be marked as a composite exhibit and entered into the record as hearing exhibit 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Church, would you please provide a summary of your testimony at this time?
Sure thing. The purpose of my testimony is to provide information regarding DEC's nuclear fuel purchasing practices, provide costs for the June 1, 2020 through May 31, 2021 review period, and describe changes for the October 1, 2021 through September 30, 2022 billing period. DEC's nuclear fuel procurement practices involve computing near and long-term consumption forecasts, establishing nuclear system inventory levels, projecting required annual fuel purchases, requesting proposals from qualified suppliers, negotiating a portfolio of long-term contracts from diverse sources of supply, and monitoring deliveries against contract commitments. Consistent with industry practices, long-term contracts are used extensively to cover forward requirements and ensure security of supply. DEC's portfolio of diversified contract pricing yielded an average unit cost of $43.63 per pound for uranium concentrates during the review period, representing an increase of 4% per pound from the prior review period. The average unit cost of DEC's purchases of enrichment services during the review period decreased 5% to $101.60 per separative work unit. Delivered costs for fabrication and conversion services have a limited impact on the overall fuel expense rate, given that the dollar amounts for these purchases represent a substantially smaller percentage of DEC's total direct fuel cost relative to uranium concentrates or enrichment. Because fuel is typically expensed over 2 to 3 operating cycles, roughly 3 to 6 years, DEC's nuclear fuel expense in the upcoming billing period will be determined by the cost of fuel assemblies loaded into the reactors during the review period as well as prior periods. The average fuel expense is expected to increase from 0.572 cents per kilowatt hour incurred in the review period to approximately 0.606 cents per kilowatt hour in the billing period. This concludes my testimony summary.
Thank you, Mr. Church. If you would, please answer any questions of council or the commission.
Absolutely.
South Carolina Energy Users Committee.
No questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy.
No questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Office of Regulatory Staff.
Mr. Chairman, we have no questions for Mr. Church. Thank you.
Fellow Commissioners, questions for Mr. Church.
Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chair Belzer.
Good morning, Mr. Church. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay?
I can. Very well. Thank you.
Mr. Church, in your summary and also in your direct testimony, you used the term separative work unit. Can you tell me what that is, please?
Yeah, that is a measure of the degree of work that it takes to enrich uranium from a natural concentration up to the enrichments that we need to satisfy the generation that we need to produce from the nuclear units. So it's separating the U-235 isotopes from the U-238 isotopes. U-235 is critical for enrichment, and separative work units is a measure of the unit of work to cause that enrichment process to occur.
And you quote a dollar amount for the review period. So that is a fluctuating cost or payment that Duke would have to pay?
That is correct. It depends on the contract deliveries that we have occur during the particular period of reference.
Okay, and you indicated that the cost per separative work unit decreased from the prior review period, but that the average cost per pound of, I reckon, the fuel itself increased. Is that correct?
So, the piece that increased is the uranium concentrates, which is the mined and milled uranium out of the ground. Then we have several processing steps, one of those being enrichment that is needed to convert uranium into the final product, the fuel assemblies that we receive at the site and insert into the reactor core.
Well, and where I'm going is overall, if you can answer this, and overall, did the amount that Duke paid during the review period for the uranium and these enrichment services, did that increase or decrease from the prior review period?
I would need to go look at the actual dollars spent, but
Is there somebody else that may be able to answer that question?
it would be very close because the percentage of overall cost for the fuel is roughly 40% for each of these components. Uranium makes up a little bit higher percentage of the total cost in enrichment.
Okay. But Duke projects that during the billing period, meaning from October 1 through next September 30th of 2022, Duke projects or forecasts an increase in the cost of uranium. Is that correct?
We project an increase in the fuel expense, and fuel is committed to the batch when it is inserted into the reactor core. So that is based on deliveries that have occurred in advance of when we put the fuel assemblies in service. So what you're seeing reflected in the fuel expense estimate between the review period and the billing period is based on purchases that would have occurred in prior periods primarily.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that and for clarifying my inartfully worded question. Mr. Chairman.
I hope I was clear enough for you.
You were. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's all I have.
Commissioner Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Church.
Morning.
There's a kind of a national movement as well as I know Duke has made a commitment to achieve net zero carbon emissions. And this certainly will have an effect on the use of nuclear fuel and in the creation of power. How do you see such a goal affecting the nuclear fuel market going forward in the future?
Well, it will balance not only demand here in the U.S. You really need to take a look at what's happening globally as well, and you know, in some of the Asian regions, we're expecting increases in fuel demand out in the future, whereas here in the U.S., you will see some generators that are going to pursue subsequent license renewal like Duke Energy is, and then you will see some generators that shut their reactors down. So overall, an expected reduction from demand in the U.S. over time, but larger demand globally for nuclear fuel that in total we expect will result in moderately increased demand over time into the future.
Well, with the increased demand in the international market and the tensions that, of course, that we're dealing with internationally, what's your main source as far as uranium? Where does it come from?
Yeah, we really look to diversify our sources of supply. So, we procure from all over the world. Kazakhstan, Namibia, Canada, Australia, Russia. That's definitely a key element of our procurement process, is to ensure we are well diversified and not dependent on one source or region.
Okay. Do you think your older plants, or that any of your plants are able to reach a higher enrichment level or more efficiency in the future? Is there some change coming in that area?
We are certainly looking at the potential to increase enrichment and burn up of our fuel into the future, which would make certainly our 17 by 17 plants at McGuire, Catawba, and Harris more efficient, to potentially transition to 24-month cycles. We are currently involved in discussions with our fuel vendors on what would be required to make that happen. And it would be a team effort. It would not only be changes at Duke, but also with our fuel suppliers.
And if you're able to become more efficient, wouldn't that help to drive down the price of what we talked about, the separative work unit, or the cost of production?
Well, I think the efficiency really comes in reduced outages for Duke, reduced number of outages. We'd actually be using more fuel to operate to 24-month cycles.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Good morning, Mr. Church. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Good morning.
Thank you. Good. You mentioned a minute ago that Duke is pursuing the relicensing of some of its units and extending the time period for their use, whereas other utilities are, thinking about shutting them down instead of relicensing. So just at kind of a high level, what, in your opinion, are the key drivers to that decision? That's a big difference between relicensing and shutting down, and just like to hear a little bit of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think every utility is a bit different in how they look at it, but certainly for Duke, I mean, we're looking at carbon emissions playing a part in our targets for the future, and just overall cost of generation of the various sources that we have in our system, which other utilities would vary in that respect. So those are really the key factors, I think, that the various utilities are making their decisions based upon.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. Good morning, Mr. Church. Good to see you.
Good morning. Good to see you.
My question stems from your testimony on page 8, where you talk about the average fuel expense is expected to increase from 0.572 cents or 57.2 cents per kilowatt hour incurred in the review period to approximately, I would guess, 0.606 cents. What I heard you say in your testimony was 0.0, and I'm 606 and 0.0572, and I just wanted to get some clarification. I may not have, heard the rest of what you said in there, so I was listening for 0.572 and 0.606.
Yeah, I might have confused you. I believe I said 0.572 cents to 0.606 cents. That is the expectation.
Totally understand that one. Thank you. I just misheard
Thank
it
you.
then. Appreciate the clarification.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Any more questions for this witness? Any redirect?
No redirect, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Mr. Church, you may step down from the stand.
Okay, thank you.
Attorney Brown, please call your next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The company would next call Mr. Stephen Capps.
Mr. Capps, if you would take the witness stand and pause to be sworn in by our court reporter.
Mr. Capps, if you would raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Mr. Capps. Would you please state your name for the record?
Stephen D. Capps.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Duke Energy, and I am the Senior Vice President of Nuclear Operations for the South Carolina sites.
How long have you worked in the nuclear industry?
I have worked in some capacity in nuclear for over 34 years.
What is your educational background?
I have a degree in mechanical engineering. I was licensed as a senior reactor operator at Oconee Nuclear Station, and I have completed a number of Institute of Nuclear Power Operations senior plant management courses.
Thank you, Mr. Capps. Please describe any prior roles that you have held that are relevant to your testimony in this proceeding.
I have worked as an engineer, as a senior reactor operator, as a shift technical advisor, as an engineering manager, plant manager, a site vice president at McGuire Nuclear Station, senior vice president of nuclear corporate, and senior vice president of nuclear operations.
Please describe your current responsibilities at the company.
As Senior Vice President of Nuclear Operations for the South Carolina plants, I have direct accountability for the safe, reliable, and cost-effective operation of Catawba Nuclear Station, Oconee Nuclear Station, and Robinson Nuclear Plant. And then beyond that, I am involved with the overall operation of all of the nuclear plants in our fleet.
Thank you, Mr. Capps. Mr. Chairman, based upon Mr. Capps' extensive experience in matters related to nuclear plant operations, I propose to tender this witness as an expert in the field of nuclear plant operations.
All right. The applicant has tendered Mr. Stephen Capps as an expert in nuclear plant operations. Is there any cross-examination? All right, hearing none, Mr. Capps is qualified as an expert in nuclear plant operation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Capps, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 12 pages of direct testimony that were pre-filed with the commission in this proceeding?
Yes, I did.
If I asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed direct testimony this morning, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that Mr. Capps' pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Capps' pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Capps, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 2 publicly filed exhibits that were attached to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes to those exhibits at this time?
No, I do not.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that Mr. Capps' 2 publicly filed exhibits be entered as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Capps' 2 publicly filed, pre-filed exhibits will be entered into the record as a composite exhibit, and that will be hearing exhibit number 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Capps, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 1 confidentially filed exhibit that was attached to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes to that exhibit at this time?
No, I do not.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that Mr. Capps' confidentially filed exhibit be entered as the next hearing exhibit and that it remain under seal.
Mr. Capps, Exhibit 3 will be marked and entered into the record as a confidential exhibit and remain under seal. And that will be hearing exhibit number 3.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Capps, would you please provide a summary of your testimony at this time?
Yes, ma'am, I will. The purpose of my testimony is to describe and discuss the performance of DEC's nuclear fleet during the review period of June 1st, 2020 through May 31st, 2021. DEC operated its nuclear stations in a reasonable and prudent manner during their review period, supplying 62% of the power generated. The 7 nuclear units operated at an actual system average capacity factor of 96.96% and a net nuclear capacity factor, excluding reasonable outage time, of 101.73%. Additionally, for the 21st consecutive year, DEC's 7 nuclear units have achieved an actual system average capacity factor exceeding 90%. The company's nuclear fleet has a history of top quartile performance. Industry data for 2020 ranked Duke Energy's nuclear fleet favorably when compared to other large domestic nuclear fleets using key performance indicators in the areas of personal safety, radiological dose, manual and automatic shutdowns, capacity factor, force loss rate, industry performance index, and total operating cost. On a larger industry basis, using data from the 2020 Electric Utility Cost Group, McGuire, Catawba, and Oconee all ranked in the top quartile in total operating cost among the 56 U.S. nuclear stations reporting. These performance results support DEC's continued commitment to achieving high performance without compromising safety and reliability. There were 3 refueling outages completed during the review period: fall 2020 outages at McGuire Unit 1 and Oconee Unit 1, followed by a spring 2021 outage at Catawba Unit 2. Additionally, DEC experienced 2 brief forced outages during their review period at Catawba Unit 1 in September 2020 and McGuire Unit 2 in February 2021. These units were safely and efficiently returned to service, and I believe the units were operated reasonably and prudently, and that our operations were conducted in a way that minimized our fuel costs. This concludes my testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Capps. If you would, please answer any questions of council or the commission.
South Carolina Energy Users Committee.
No questions of this witness. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy.
No questions for this witness.
Office of Regulatory Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have no questions for Mr. Capps.
Fellow commissioners, questions for this witness. Commissioner Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Capps, good morning. I just have one question. In reading your testimony earlier, you state that Duke is in the top of the heap as far as ratings and rankings. And I just wondered, what is that? You mentioned several factors it's based on, but is there such a ranking procedure, or is there some sort of national guide as to that sort of thing?
There is not a national ranking or a tier that goes through and rates plants across the industry. There are a number of things that are out there that we look at in the aggregate. The EUCG cost data is an example relative to relative to operating costs for the units. The other thing that we pay particular attention to, there's an industry organization that has about 10 key indicators that are reported similarly for all of the stations. And we pay particular attention to our standing relative to those indicators because it gives you a fairly good comparison across the industry since the indicator is similar.
Is there any particular indicator or any particular part of the ranking that you feel Duke needs to improve on or seems to lack on?
I would tell you it's plant specific. You know, when you look at it in the aggregate, you can get one picture, but when you separate it out and you look at each individual plant, then you'll see a bit of a different view. For example, for Catawba Nuclear Station, because of some activities and some reliability work that was in a fairly high radiological area, Catawba's dose standing relative to radiological dose is not as good as we would like it to be in the industry. So that's an area that we'll continue to try to improve. So you almost have to look at each plant and then dissect it by area, by plant. But there are certainly areas at all of our sites that we continue to work on to improve.
I don't know, when people talk about rankings, I just know when I took the bar exam many years ago, they don't give you a grade. So I was able to tell my mom I made the highest in the class. So I'm just sometimes intrigued by rankings, but thank you for your testimony.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for Mr. Capps?
Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chair Belzer.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Capps.
Good morning.
Mr. Capps, I noticed in your testimony that the refueling, the scheduled refueling for different plants was different days, different number of days. Why is that? Why is it the same, either 28 days to refuel, or I think the other one was 32 or something like that? Why are there differences?
It is different depending on the scope of the maintenance activities and the project activities that are being done at each station. For example, if you look at the most recent Catawba and Oconee outages that are talked about, they both replaced low pressure turbine rotors during that refueling outage. That's a significant piece of project work. So that drove their outage to be a bit longer in the low 30s than what a typical just maintenance outage would be. So it's driven by the maintenance, the inspections, or the projects that are included in that particular outage.
Okay, thank you very much. Looking at your CAPS Exhibit 1, where you calculate the nuclear system capacity factor. Are you with me?
Yes.
Tell me, line 4, reasonable nuclear system reductions. How do you come up with that amount?
It's really the allowance from the code. I was going to read it to you or kind of paraphrase it, but it's really the things that are highlighted on page 6 of the testimony. So reasonable outage time associated with refueling, reasonable maintenance, repair, and equipment replacement outages, and then the reduced power going into or coming out of a refueling outage.
Okay, so
those are really the factors.
So what you're doing is calculating the time that the unit was down, the time that was where it was being shut down and ramped back up, and converting that into the megawatt megawatt hours. Is that fair?
That's correct.
Okay. Mr. Capps, thank you for your testimony this morning. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Capps from commissioners? Hearing none, Attorney Brown, do you have any redirect?
No redirect, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Mr. Capps, you may step down. Attorney,
Mr. Chairman, at this time, we would ask that Mr. Capps be excused.
is there any objection to Mr. Capps being excused?
No objection.
All right, without objection, Mr. Capps, you are excused, sir.
Thank you,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman.
All right, Attorney Brown, please call your next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The company would next call Brett Phipps to the stand.
Mr. Phipps, if you would take the witness stand and pause to be sworn in by the court reporter.
Mr. Phipps, if you would raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Phipps. Would you please state your name for the record?
My name is Brett Phipps.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Duke Energy, and I am the Managing Director of Fuel Procurement.
How long have you worked in fuel and fuel procurement?
I have 28 years of experience in the coal industry and 16 years of experience in the fuel procurement area.
Can you tell us a little bit about your educational background and professional affiliations?
Yes. I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry, and I'm a member of the American Coal Council, the Coal Institute, Electric and Coal Exchange, and the Southern Gas Association.
Please describe your responsibilities at the company.
As Managing Director of Fuel Procurement for Duke Energy Corporation, I manage the organization responsible for the purchase and delivery of coal, and I supervise the procurement of all reagents. Until August 1st of 2021, I was also responsible for the procurement of natural gas to the company's regulated commercial generation fleet. I participate in all aspects of the overall strategic direction and commercial management of the purchase, delivery, storage of fossil fuels, and I supervise the company's coal procurement activity and associated transportation, including the negotiation and administration of long-term and short-term purchase contracts.
Mr. Chairman, given Mr. Phipps' extensive experience in fuel and reagent procurement, I propose to tender Mr. Phipps as an expert in the field of coal, natural gas, and reagent procurement.
All right. Is there any cross-examination? Hearing none, Mr. Phipps is qualified as an expert in coal and natural gas procurement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I'm sorry, I think I might have missed one. Coal, natural gas, and reagent procurement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Phipps, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 11 pages of direct testimony that were pre-filed with the commission in this proceeding?
I did.
If I asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed direct testimony this morning, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that Mr. Phipps' pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Phipps' pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Phipps, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared 2 exhibits that were attached to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes to those exhibits at this time?
No, I do not.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that Mr. Phipps' 2 pre-filed exhibits be entered as the next composite hearing exhibit.
Mr. Phipps' 2 pre-filed exhibits will be marked as a composite exhibit and entered into the record as hearing exhibit number 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Phipps, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 4 pages of supplemental direct testimony that were pre-filed with the commission in this proceeding?
Yes, I did.
If I asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed supplemental direct testimony this morning, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that Mr. Phipps' pre-filed supplemental direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Phipps' pre-filed supplemental direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Phipps, would you please provide a summary of your testimony at this time?
Yes. The purpose of my direct testimony is to describe DEC's fossil fuel purchasing practices, provide fossil fuel costs for the period of June 1st, 2020 through May 31st of 2021, and describe changes forthcoming for the period October 1st, 2021 through September 30th of 2022. Duke Energy Carolina's average delivered cost of coal per ton for the review period was $80.65 per ton, compared to $85.33 per ton in the prior review period, representing a decrease of approximately 5%. This includes an average transportation cost of $32.32 per ton in the review period, compared to $29.92 per ton in the prior review period, representing an increase of approximately 8%. DEC's average cost of gas purchase for the review period was $3.16 per million MBTU, as compared to $3.06 per million MBTU in the prior review period, representing an increase of approximately 3%. The cost of gas is inclusive of gas supply, transportation, storage, and financial hedging. DEC's coal burn for the review period was 6.9 million tons, compared to a coal burn of 7.2 million tons in the prior review period, representing a decrease of 4%. The company's natural gas burn for the review period was 133.1 million MBTUs of natural gas in the review period, compared to 128.5 million MBTUs in the prior review period, representing an increase of approximately 4%. DEC experienced a significant shift in generation from coal to natural gas in the first half of the review period due to unprecedented load reduction from the COVID-19 pandemic and low natural gas prices. However, rising gas prices and strong weather-driven demand increased gas to coal switching through the latter half of the review period. This concludes the summary of my direct testimony. Continuing on for my supplemental, the purpose of my supplemental direct testimony is to update the projected coal and natural gas burns and costs for the billing period based on the updated July 2021 fuel forecast. I also provide an update on the latest trends in coal and natural gas market conditions. Since the April 2021 forecast that was used to develop my direct testimony, sustained upward pressure on natural gas prices has continued. Similar upward pressure on supply prices has also been seen in the coal supply markets. DEC's projections for the billing period based on the July 2021 fuels forecast include an increase in the coal burn projection to 5.5 million tons compared to the 4.4 million tons shown in the April fuels forecast. DEC's natural gas burn projections for the billing period decreased to 203 million MBTUs based on the July 2021 fuel forecast. This projection is down compared to the 215.6 million MBTU shown in the April fuels forecast. This concludes the summary of my supplemental direct testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Phipps. If you would, please answer any questions of council or the commission.
South Carolina Energy Users Committee.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Please proceed.
Thank you. Mr. Phipps, your July 30 testimony was based on an April forecast. Is that correct?
That is correct.
You filed your supplemental testimony 18 days later on August 18. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And between July 30th and August 18, you raised your fuel cost by about $38 million. Is that correct?
I'd have to look at the number, subject to check, but I feel that you're correct.
The rate increase to industrial customers, for instance, rose from what, about 2.25% to about 5%. Is that correct?
Certainly the rate structure and rate calculation is outside of my roles and responsibilities, so I don't want to mislead the commission or anybody. So,
but it increased, isn't that true?
that is true. It increased. That is correct.
Good. Thank you. Now, I am curious to know what is involved in Duke's forecast process. What kinds of information is involved? For instance, does Duke use historic data?
Certainly, again, the forecasting modeling is not in my roles and responsibility. I don't have direct accountability for the forecasting modeling. I can tell you that we do participate in providing fuel price contracts as an input. I know the modeling process uses outside third-party curves to determine commodity prices. The existing transportation contracts goes into that modeling. As far as beyond the scope of actual fuel contracts and fuel commodity prices, that's beyond the scope of my responsibilities.
And that's fine. But so I think I understood you to say that when Duke makes its forecast, it uses information that it receives from within the Duke organization, correct?
A portion of that is correct. It also uses outside sources.
Well, all right, good. And then with respect to the inside sources, do you provide data towards the forecasts?
Yes.
And would you provide data on coal and natural gas and those sorts of pricing?
Yes.
And how frequently does Duke perform a forecast?
Well, certainly the forecast can be done at a request. The frequency depends on the criteria. It is typically done quarterly, but can be done on a monthly basis as needed.
All right, and would there be any material cost to do a quarterly forecast, a monthly forecast, excuse me?
I'm sure there'll be incremental costs for the addition, but I would say it would be a minor at best.
And if Duke were performing monthly forecasts in the case of this fuel docket, in all likelihood, your July 30 testimony would have proved to be accurate or certainly more accurate, correct?
I don't know the exact timing of when the particular runs were done, but certainly if a run was done closer to the direct testimony, it would have reflected that updated forecast at the time.
Yes, sir. And I think, can we agree that at least based on this docket and our experience in this docket, an April forecast for June 30 testimony is too distant to be reliable?
I don't think that I necessarily feel that an April forecast does not correctly reflect the testimony. I would say there was quite unique circumstances that occurred between the two time frames that we saw a significant change in the fuel forecast over a period of time. But again, certainly any forecast that is closer to the testimony time frame will be as accurate as that forecast is at that time.
Very fine. And so as I understand it, there was a July forecast that Duke performed?
Yes.
And as I understand it, your August 18 testimony was based upon this July forecast?
Yes.
And it would seem to me that that with a little bit of luck, you might have been able to use that July forecast in your July 30 testimony to be more accurate in your fuel cost analysis. Correct?
Certainly appreciate the feedback. Certainly luck doesn't come into play here, but certainly we follow a systematic process approach to when we file, and certainly once again any updated forecast as close to that testimony certainly would have reflected in my testimony.
Yes, sir. And then What steps has Duke determined it will take to avoid having such a gross disparity in the fuel cost over an 18-day period, such as we've seen in this fuel case?
Certainly, a gross disparity certainly doesn't reflect necessarily the difference between the two forecasts, in my opinion. It reflects the difference between some unique commodity changes that's global in nature and just not domestic. But I will say that we take any opportunity when we see these things to do lessons learned and an opportunity to reflect and see how we can improve our processes to ensure that the impacts to the customer is minimal at best.
So do I infer from your answer that Duke has not is not prepared to say today what steps it's going to take to avoid your having to file direct and supplemental direct testimony next year?
No, what I would say is, once again, from the beginning, the modeling activity is out of the scope of my job responsibilities. Although I participate in inputs, there's a broader group under the department that really looks at a full broad, we don't want to make a correction based on fuels alone. We want to take a holistic view on the entire system process. That involves other individuals outside of my job. What I'm saying is we are committed to continuously looking for opportunities to improve our processes and make sure there's customer value and mitigate any unfavorable impacts to the customer. So what I can say is those processes are ongoing. We have done. And certainly I just don't know the full output of those discussions on behalf of everyone that participated.
All right. So as I understand your testimony, that while you do very well at what you do, you're not aware of what steps will be taken next year because that's in someone else's area of responsibility.
Certainly, I become aware as we participate in conversations. I'm not working in a silo or blind when we're making our decisions. But once again, it's a holistic view as a department, and we certainly want part of that input.
All right. So you don't know today, do you, sir?
I cannot, to your question about what specifically we're doing about changing forecasting and timing, I am not prepared to give you an answer today, no.
Very fine. Thank you so much, Mr. Phipps.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman.
South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy.
No questions, Mr. Chairman. Yeah.
Office of Regulatory Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have no questions for Mr. Phipps.
Redirect. I'm sorry, my fellow commissioners. I'm skipping my friends here. Any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. Mr. Phipps, just continuing on that previous dialogue with Attorney Elliott, there are 3 more deck witnesses coming up. Whom should we ask those questions regarding the calculations and the timing and lessons learned?
That would be, I think the best witness would be Brian Sykes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Phipps.
Thank you.
No further.
Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Phipps.
Good morning.
I was wondering if you could provide a bit of an update on what's going on with natural gas and the impacts from Hurricane Ida. I know that natural gas prices are up significantly from a month or so ago, and probably some of that's related to Hurricane Ida. I wonder if you could just kind of give an overview of where things are on that front, please.
Yeah, certainly. Certainly, Hurricane Ida had significant impacts to not only natural gas, but all commodities in the Gulf. There has been a slow recovery in those commodities. As a result, it has had an impact. I will tell you, as far as other than price, physical supply has not been impacted, especially for DEC. The majority of what we purchase comes from onshore sources, so not as impacted on the offshore. So certainly, we did not witness any supply disruptions as a result. Now, certainly, in addition to Ida, the reason why we have seen gas prices surpass $5 an MMBTU, and there's some other drivers in that too. Primarily, Basically, you have inventory levels that where we stand today are 16% lower than where they were at last year, and they are 7% lower than the 5-year average. So you have a lower inventory impact. You have production that has, because of the COVID-related decreased demand, there were supply corrections in production, and they've had discipline not to necessarily to bring that back. And capital is not as easy to get to bring on some additional gas production. So gas production is lagging. Inventory is lower. You had a impact of the hurricane, and you have a lot of market participants that recall last year's winter, especially February, and the impacts that that had. So you also are having a market impact reflecting on all of these drivers that I just said, with the potential of winter showing up. As a result, gas prices we've seen an upward trend. Like I said, it's at $5 or slightly above $5 in MMBtu as we see today.
Okay. Thank you. So let me ask a question about coal, if you can help educate me here a little bit. So I would say that the coal that Duke uses probably primarily comes from West Virginia. And I've heard a little bit of discussion about the differences between coal that is produced in West Virginia compared to, say, Wyoming. Can you tell me a little bit about those differences and how that impacts the way they burn, the way they're used, the reagents, or whatever? Just you can just kind of give me a little bit of information on the differences between the types of coal, please.
Absolutely, I'd be glad to. So I will start with the acronym CAP. That stands for Central Appalachian Coal. That is coals in West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky, and parts of Virginia. That's the primary coal. When our units in DEC were originally constructed, that was the base fuel. That was really how they were constructed for. That typically has, just for a heating value, a 12,000 BTU. The sulfurs tend to be, such that, and I'll rattle off a 2 to 2.5 pound SO2. That'll come into play shortly. Expanding beyond that, the NAP, another acronym, which is Northern Appalachian, is coals in the Northern West Virginia and Pennsylvania. They are higher heat. They're 13,000 BTU, but the SO2 in those areas are about 4.5 pounds. All of this come into play that I'll wrap back around shortly back to our facilities and how that impacts us. The next region that is in our coal spectrum is the Illinois Basin. That coal is located actually in Illinois and Indiana primarily, Western Kentucky. Those coals tend to be a little bit lower heat, 11,000 pounds. The SO2 typically is 5 pounds. There is some criteria in the Illinois Basin, certain mining operations that have high chlorine issues. High chlorine issues is very challenging for operations, as you can imagine. The chlorine is corrosive in nature to the equipment and the boilers. Moving out west, there's two primary coals out west. One is Wyoming that you mentioned. It's a lot lower BTU, 8,800, but the SO2 is like less than 1 pound. This coal can be very volatile in nature. It is very fine. It is known to combust. You have to have special treating for that. It's challenging for that coal to make it very far because it's typically, you might see a lower cost per ton, but the transportation is such to get it from West Coast to East Coast. And with the lower BTU, it is not an economic opportunity for the company or the customer at this time. Lastly is Colorado bituminous. It's a coal that much well reflects the coals from West Virginia, but it is once again so far out into to the western area. Transportation makes it very uneconomic at this time for it to be transported into DEC's territory. If I may, I'll bring those back together into our facilities. A couple things, the NAP region and the ILB regions certainly have certain other um, uh, criteria, characteristics that make it difficult to handle within in our boilers. For fuel diversification and reliability, years ago, the company invested capital into its coal units to enable fuel flexibility. And what that means is, historically, years ago, more than a decade ago, we could only burn cat. We've invested to where we can introduce Northern Appalachian and Illinois basins into the portfolio. Now we have to scrub, so that's the reason why I brought the SO2s into the discussion. A 2 pound, a 5 pound, a 4 pound. There's certain permit requirements, air permits that we are required to abide by. And for our scrub units and the DEC units, they have certain criteria. So we can't use one coal, particularly from a NAP region 100%, because that quality parameter is too high and would put us in jeopardy of having a violation with a state permit. So we have to blend those facilities. So we have been very successful in our strategies and our approach to introduce and diversify our portfolio and extract value for that for the customer.
Very good. Thank you. That's very helpful. I appreciate it. That's all I have.
You're welcome.
Vice Chair Belzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Phipps.
Good morning.
How are you today?
I'm doing fine. I hope you are as well.
I'm fine. Thank you very much. Mr. Phipps, on page 9 of your direct testimony, you discuss the new rail rate structure and the new tiered contract structure. Could you provide a little more explanation on that process, please?
Yes, I can. So the prior contracts that we had with the railroads, those railroads being NS and CSX for the DEC, were fixed variable in nature. They expire, and those contracts were put in place for a short term, 2 years. It was a new structure, but it created, and we actually saw customer value and savings as a result of that fixed structure. When that contract expired, and the railroads looked to renegotiate, renew, they gave us an opportunity, or they proposed to continue with the fixed variable rate. After the company did some extensive modeling and really gave us support, that fixed variable structure no longer created the customer value and introduced more risk than the company was willing to take. Therefore, we provided that feedback. After the railroads received that feedback, they gave us a variable rate. The variable rate was quite high. And really, when we plugged that in, if you will, into our modeling activity, it provided us feedback. And when we provided that feedback at the rates that they were proposing, and they proposed those rates because the feedback that we received, that they could no longer respond to quick, prompt changes in volatility and coal burn, meaning their resources are constrained. They have other business units such as automotive, aggregate, chemical, other things, that they could not respond to spikes and jumps, just like we're witnessing this year in coal burns based on different commodity prices and demand. So when they gave us this rate, we modeled it once again. The feedback we gave them that at that rate, from a system cost perspective, looking at all commodities and all generation, it was not, the impact was a lower coal volume. Obviously, that concerned them from their business unit, the revenue, and their ability to staff appropriately. The companies entered into extended negotiations, whereas through the process, we came to a tiered rate structure. What that means is both the railroad wants to be able and the company wants to be able to have a rate that really reduces as much as we can the volatility that we see, so we don't have to react to coal markets changes. So that was the intent, was to find the optimum rate But the railroad certainly gave us feedback. When the volumes go lower, there's a cost impact. When the rates go higher, there's a rate impact. For them to be able to respond either to furlough employees at a lower burn or to hire new resources furlough employees at a lower burn, excuse me, or furlough at a lower burn or hire new resources at a higher burn. So through those negotiations, a tiered structure was came really bubbled out of those conversations, whereas the optimum rate, which would add the most customer value to the customers and to the company, would also give the railroad more predictability and understanding and able to resource and staff and understand the revenue. If there is changes to that coal burn for whatever reason, those tiered structure would take those under consideration. This doesn't change the way we dispatch our units. It just means that the weighted average rail rate for an annual basis is used in our dispatching. So essentially, we are looking to optimize the different rates to whereas it adds the maximum amount of customer value, reduces volatility, and creates a reliable fuel supply and support and services from the railroad.
Does the transportation rate, if Duke ends up asking for delivery of less coal than anticipated, does the transportation rate go up? And conversely, if Duke ends up contracting or asking for delivery of more coal than anticipated, would the rate go down?
As those volumes change up or down, there are higher rates on either side of the optimum rate. But what that would do, that would be accounted for in our modeling and would change the weighted average on an annual basis. It may change the rate, but we would anticipate on an annual basis that those changes would come more back to the optimum rate over time.
Will Duke be able to show that this new pricing structure does provide a benefit to the customer in the fuel proceeding?
Yes, we can. We have did that modeling against the conventional rate that they had provided us, and it led and afterwards led to this the new structure that we have. We have and can provide.
And you refer a few times to, and I'm going to say it wrong, the stochastic. Thank you. Production cost model. Can you explain that just briefly for me?
Yeah. Once again, just to state, the modeling itself is out of my job description. Okay. We certainly use this stochastic modeling as a framework, a map, if you will, to help us with our fuel decisions. So I can expand on that. This stochastic modeling, it uses over 100 iterations. What that means is the prior model was deterministic in nature, meaning it used a price, the weather, the demand, all at one point in time, and it had resulted a coal burn, which we use to make our decisions. This new stochastic modeling is a little more robust, whereas it doesn't just look at one point in time, it looks at different iterations. What that means, it looks at different demand, different weather, different commodity prices at different times. So it gives you a range, if you will. It'll give you a mean coal burn, which we use really for the basis of our coal procurement decisions. It also gives you some statistic modeling like P25, P75, meaning the probability that this can increase and decrease. And we take those ranges, the P25, P75s, and there's multiple Ps in between that we use to really look at how we can mitigate our risk associated with contracting. We look in our contracting beyond that because of that modeling allows us to have a more robust contract framework where we have flexibility in volumes and different parameters to help mitigate any impacts, not only to the generation fleet, but impacts to the customer.
What kind of inventory does Duke try to keep on hand for the coal plants?
Well, that will vary based on the timing on real demand. Our target currently that we have in our base is 45. Now we are below those levels at this time. It's 40. Excuse me, it's 40. I'm sorry. Right now, our target that we have in our base rate is 40. We target those. We are lower than that now, as we look at different initiatives, and we also look at higher demand. It's really, as I mentioned in my supplemental testimony and my testimony, that we've seen gas to coal switching because of gas pricing.
Okay. And these contracts that expired on June 30, I take it that Duke has staggered transportation contracts. All of them aren't expiring at the same time. Is that correct?
In this particular case, we did align where they expired at the same time. If you recall, CSX and NS, I will say it's challenging to have one railroad, to align one railroad to the company's strategy, but to have both railroads to agree to the same strategy. And we did that on purpose to ensure that there wasn't an unfavorable impact. Meaning, if we negotiated one rail contract with the NS and then separately at a different time negotiated something and it came up with a different structure, different rates, it could skew the overall coal generation portfolio more to one or the other railroad. And we wanted to ensure that we did and we negotiated at the same time, whereas this rate structure was aligned and gave value to the customer and reduced volatility. And we did that for 2 years. That's the reason we did it for a shorter period of time, that we didn't want to extend it beyond that. And a good thing we did, because we saw that at the end of that 2 years, after adding that all the value, that it no longer added that value going forward. This new tiered rate structure we have in place for 18 months.
Okay, that was my next question, but I wasn't sure if that was confidential. Okay.
That's okay.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate your responses to my questions this morning. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have for this witness.
All right. Any more questions for this witness?
Chairman Williams.
Commissioner Caston.
Good morning, Mr. Phillips.
Good morning.
I know in response to Vice Chair Belzer's question, you said you weren't the modeling guy, the modeling expert, but listening to your description of the model, it sounded to me like it was a probabilistic model that looks at scenarios. Is that what this model is?
Yeah, I think I mentioned deterministic modeling was the terminology, and then the second was stochastic, if I understand you correctly.
Yes. Good enough. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions for this witness? Any redirect? I'm sorry, Commissioner Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, sir. How are you today?
Good morning. Doing well. Thank you for asking. Hope you're doing well also.
Yes, sir. I want to ask you to turn to page 35 of your direct testimony, please. When you get there, let me know.
Oh, that's page 35. I'm sorry, Mr. Commissioner, but what I have is a 11-page file, so I don't know if you have something in there.
All right. Let me just read the quote, and maybe it'll help refresh your recollection. You state that, quote, if DEC updated its marginal cost to represent the actual production cost of each unit, its coal units would shift higher on a supply stack. Would you please explain what you mean by that statement?
I'm sorry, Mr. Commissioner, but I don't think that. I think that may be witness Suez.
Okay, I apologize.
No, that's quite all right.
I had it down in the wrong column here, looks like. So would he be better qualified to answer that question?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Were you the one that recommended the commission direct DEC to conduct a new retirement study for each unit in the coal fleet?
No, I was not.
That, who could answer that question for us?
Hmm. I'm not quite sure, Mr. Commissioner.
All right, no problem. No further questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, any redirect?
No redirect, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Let's take our, I'm sorry, sir. Mr. Phipps, you may step down from the witness stand.
Mr. Chairman, DEC would request at this time that Mr. Phipps be excused.
Any objection to Mr. Phipps being excused?
No objection, Mr. Chairman.
All right, hearing no objection, Mr. Phipps is excused without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Phipps.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to take our first morning break. We will recess until 11:40. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We're here in docket number 2021-3-E. Before we start back with our next witness, we're going to take roll. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioners Thomas, Williams, Powers, Belzer, and Jay Williams. Joining us virtually, we have Commissioners Caston and Irvin. Attorney Brown, if you would, please call your next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The company would next call Mr. Brian Walsh to the stand.
Mr. Walsh, if you would take the stand and pause to be sworn in by the court reporter.
Mr. Walsh, if you would raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Walsh. Would you please state your name for the record?
Yes, Brian P. Walsh.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I work for Duke Energy Business Services, which provides services to DEC and DEP. And I'm the Vice President of Central Services and Organizational Effectiveness.
How long have you worked in the fossil hydro solar industry?
Since 1999.
What is your educational background?
I have a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering and a master's degree in mechanical engineering with a concentration in thermodynamics and heat transfer. I'm also a registered professional engineer.
Please describe any prior roles you've held that are relevant to your testimony in this proceeding.
In previous roles, I have worked on the design, commissioning, and testing of combined cycle power plants. Since 2003, I've held various roles of increasing responsibility in the generation engineering, operations areas, project management, and also the role of the technical manager at Marshall Steam Station and station manager at Gallagher Station and also Markland Hydro Station. I was also the Midwest Regional Manager from 2012 to 2015 with overall responsibility for our Midwest gas turbine fleet and various coal-fired facilities in Indiana and Kentucky. I was named General Manager for outages and projects in the Carolinas in 2015, and I became the General Manager of Fossil Hydro Org Effectiveness in 2017. I assumed my current role in 2019.
Please describe your current responsibilities at the company.
In my current role, I'm responsible for providing engineering, environmental compliance planning, generation and regulatory strategy, technical services, and maintenance services for Duke Energy's fleet of fossil, hydroelectric, and solar facilities.
Mr. Chairman, at this time, based upon Mr. Walsh's education and extensive experience, I propose to tender this witness as an expert in the field of fossil, hydroelectric, and utility scale solar operations.
All right. The witness has been tendered as an expert in fossil, hydro, and utility scale solar operations. Is there any cross-examination by the parties?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. The witness will be qualified as an expert in fossil, hydro, and utility scale solar operations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Walsh, did you prepare or cause to be prepared 12 pages of direct testimony that were pre-filed with the commission in this proceeding?
I did.
If I asked you the same questions that were asked in your pre-filed direct testimony this morning, would your answers be the same?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that Mr. Walsh's pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Walsh's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Walsh, would you please provide a summary of your testimony at this time?
Yes. The purpose of my testimony is to describe DEC's fossil, hydro, solar generation portfolio, discuss the performance of DEC's fossil, hydro, solar facilities during a review period of June 1, 2020 through May 31, 2021, provide information on significant fossil, hydro, solar outages that occurred during the review period, and discuss DEC's environmental compliance efforts. DEC's fossil hydro solar generation portfolio consists of approximately 14,785 megawatts of generating capacity, which includes 6,506 megawatts of coal-fired generation, 3,277 megawatts of hydroelectric generation, 2,633 megawatts of natural gas combustion turbine generation, 2,116 megawatts of natural gas combined cycle generation, 170 megawatts of steam natural gas, 71 megawatts of solar, and 13 megawatts of combined heat and power. The company's fossil hydro generating units operated efficiently and reliably during the review period. DEC's total system generation was approximately 98.3 million megawatt hours, of which approximately 38% was provided by the fossil hydro solar fleet. The breakdown includes a 21% contribution from the coal-fired stations, approximately 14% contribution from combined cycle operations, 1% contribution for the CTs, 2% contribution from the hydro facilities, and 0.2% from the solar facilities. DEC has installed pollution control equipment on existing and new generation resources in order to meet various emissions reduction requirements. Overall, the type and quantity of emissions reducing chemicals varies depending on generation output, the chemical constituents in the fuel burned, and/or the level of emission reduction required. DEC manages the impacts of changes to the fuel mix and/or coal burn due to competing fuels and utilization of non-traditional coals. The goal is to effectively comply with emissions regulations and provide the most efficient total cost operating solution. This concludes my direct testimony summary.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. If you would, please answer any questions of council or the commission.
South Carolina Energy Users Committee.
No questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy.
No questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Office of Regulatory Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have no questions for Mr. Walsh.
Fellow Commissioners. Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. Mr. Walsh, good morning. We got a few minutes left. Good to see you.
Yes, good morning. Very good.
I believe that your testimony included dollars associated with the DERP fees and charges, and the General Assembly created the $100 max annual recovery for reasonably and prudently incurred DERP costs for residential customers. I wanted to learn a little bit more about why DEC's costs are maybe the most prudent, I'll put it that way, but I don't mean to imply really anything by that use of the term, just having fun with it. But DERP's charges are so much lower than in the other utilities, and just wondered what you could tell us about why those charges are as efficient or prudent or low, however you want to go with that question.
Thank you for the question. I am the company's utility scale solar witness. The DERP reference, I do not believe is in my testimony, and probably will be better directed to one of the other company witnesses.
Okay, I appreciate that. I'm not. I'll be listening more closely. Would you be able to talk about any major emission standards or technology improvements for the fossil fuel plants and what you anticipate there?
Well, so we are in compliance with all applicable standards. You know, we are controlling nitrogen oxide, sulfur dioxide, the mercury and air toxins standard that's out there involves us to make sure that we are all have the right combustion of our boilers, in addition to meeting certain other emissions limits. We have performed well in all those regards, utilizing reagents to allow us to get within the proper compliance levels for all of our units. As we look to the future, there's always the potential for additional regulation that could come. We have a team within the company that evaluates future potential regulations and modes towards compliance, and we feel like we'll be well positioned if any new regulations come into play.
From your last statement, does that imply that you have factored that in thinking about fuel costs going forward, and the impact of any changes regulatory wise in terms of environmental compliance?
Yes, it's a total equation, as Witness Phipps referenced. The fuel cost is one piece of it, and then you also have to look at the cost of reagents, and then also the practicality around some of these regulations on what you may retrofit and which plants you may retrofit. So, anytime that, there's a change in administration, there's always the potential that new laws or new regs could come out. And so we are always looking for the lowest cost solution for our customers. And right now, we believe we have that. And if there were further regulations, we would model those as such to make sure we continue to do so.
Thank you very much, Mr. Walsh. I appreciate it.
All right, fellow commissioners, any more questions for Mr. Walsh? Any redirect?
No redirect, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Walsh, you may step down.
Mr. Chairman, we would ask that Mr. Walsh be excused at this time.
All right, Mr. Walsh, you are excused, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and my co-counsel here, Sam Wilborn, will be putting up our next witnesses. Thank you.
All right, I see we have Mr. Martin and Mr. Sykes left. Do you anticipate long direct with Mr. Martin? Attorney Wilburn?
No, Mr. Chairman.
All right, please call Mr. Martin. Attorney Wilburn?
Thank you, sir, and good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. The company would next call Mr. Jason Martin to the stand.
Mr. Martin, if you would take the stand and pause to be sworn in by our court reporter.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
If you would raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, would you please state your name for the record?
Yes, Jason D. Martin.
By whom are you employed and in what capacity?
I'm employed by Duke Energy, and I am the Director of Distributed Energy Technology Strategy and Policy for the state of South Carolina for DEC and DEP.
Did you prepare or cause to be prepared 14 pages of direct testimony that were pre-filed with the commission in this proceeding?
Yes, I did.
If I asked you the same questions that were contained within your pre-filed direct testimony this morning, would your answers be the same?
Yes, they would.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that Mr. Martin's pre-filed direct testimony be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Martin's pre-filed direct testimony will be entered into the record as if given orally from the stand.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Martin, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared one exhibit?
Excuse me, Mr. Wilburn?
Yes, sir.
If you would, sir, increase your volume. The court reporter is having a hard time hearing you.
Sorry about that. I will talk more loudly. That's probably the most effective way for me to increase my volume on my end. Can you hear me okay?
That's better, sir. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Mr. Martin, did you also prepare or cause to be prepared one exhibit that was attached to your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes, I did.
Do you have any changes to that pre-filed exhibit at this time?
No, I do not.
Mr. Chairman, I would ask that Mr. Martin's pre-filed exhibit be entered into the record as the next hearing exhibit.
Mr. Martin's pre-filed exhibit will be entered into the record as hearing exhibit 5.
Thank you. Mr. Martin, at this time, would you please provide a summary of your pre-filed direct testimony?
Yes. The purpose of my testimony is to provide support for the Distributed Energy Resource Program, or DERP, costs that are incorporated in the proposed fuel factors by Witness Sykes. I will describe the nature of the cost, as well as any changes made to the DIRT portfolio since the 2020 fuel proceeding. DEC incurred DIRT costs totaling $10,607,225 in the review period, anticipates incurring $4,809,721 during the estimated period, and projects to incur $13,639,646 in the billing period. These costs represent the avoided and incremental costs associated with the company's approved DIRP offerings, including the purchase power agreements executed to fulfill the company's utility scale solar goals under Act 236, Distributed Energy Resource Net Energy Metering Incentive, the Solar Rebate Program, the Shared Solar Program, carrying cost on deferred solar rebate amounts, NEM avoided capacity cost, NEM meter cost, and general and administrative expenses, including incremental labor costs as a direct result of DIRP, IT, and billing enhancements, and other administrative costs associated with delivering these programs to customers. DEC has updated the 2021 value of the NEM distributed energy resources to $0.02891 per kilowatt hour for schedules RES and R-TOUD, and $0.02895 per kilowatt hour for schedules SGS, and $0.02937 for all other schedules. This concludes my testimony summary.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. If you please make yourself available for any questions of council or the commissioners.
Yes.
South Carolina Energy Users Committee.
No questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
South Carolina Coastal Conservation League, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy.
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Office of Regulatory Staff.
We have no questions for Mr. Martin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Fellow commissioners, questions for Mr. Martin. Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. Mr. Martin, my question will come as no surprise to you. I was just reading on my chart and kind of got out of kilter on my columns. But I wanted to ask about the DIRP charge that DEC has and kind of what, in the big picture, what your perspective is on why DEC has been able to keep a cost under the maximum that the General Assembly allows.
Well, Commissioner Williams, thank you for the question. I would recommend that you ask that question of Witness Sykes.
Okay.
As he has the review of those numbers and the calculation for that result.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Any more questions from commissioners for Mr. Martin? Hearing none, any redirect?
No, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
All right, Mr. Sykes, you may step down.
And Mr. Chairman, we would ask that Mr. Martin be excused at this time.
I'm sorry, I said Mr. Sykes. The anticipation is high for Mr. Sykes. I'm sorry about that, Mr. Martin. Mr. Martin, you may step down and be excused.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And we would next call Mr. Brian Sykes to the stand. And as we discussed the witness order at the top of this hearing, Mr. Sykes has direct testimony, supplemental direct testimony, as well as brief rebuttal testimony. And if it pleases the commission and Mr. Chairman, we would just go ahead and introduce all that into the record at this time. I'm not, we'll go through the normal Q&A, but we'll go ahead and go through each of those three pieces if that suits the chairman.
Understood, and thank you for that. I think now is a good time for our lunch break. We will call Mr. Sykes to the stand as the first witness after lunch. We're in recess until 1:15.